and I am so thrilled to get to spend this time today with my old friend and client, Susan Fowler. Not old.
Yeah, would you
Yeah,
define
that's
old? How do you
just
mean
about.
that?
I mean, you've been my friend and client for a long time now, and it's so great to have this conversation about your new book. In fact, I
Thank
have
you.
a copy of it right here,
Me
Self-Leadership and the
too.
One-Minute Manager. And we were looking before we got on the call for your other book, Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does. And even though at one time we had hardcovers of the book and paperbacks of the book here in the office, we could not find one. It's in such demand that it flies off the shelves.
That must be
Uh,
it.
that must be it. So if you saw my last minute email invitation, you'll know that I said that Susan is one of the most wise and inspiring people I know, and I'm so thrilled to have this chance to learn from her today. So in addition to being the author of the 2 books that I mentioned, Susan is a globally sought after speaker and consultant, and she's worked for many years on a couple of training programs, product lines through the Blanchard Corporation companies. I always get that mixed up, on self-leadership and optimal motivation. So Susan, welcome.
Thanks, Becky.
Sure. So we are going to talk today about some topics related to the new book and self-leadership and what it means. And we are recording today's call, so in case you have colleagues or friends that you'd like to share, we would welcome you to share it after this event. And what I want to invite you to do is use the question panel. You know, if you're calling in today from an organization, we'd love to see a shout out to that organization. Or if you have any questions throughout today's event that you'd like to add into the mix, please feel free to type those and I'll share them with Susan along the way. So let's dive in, Susan. I understand that this book is a revision, and I'm really,
You just...
yeah, just, you know, we'll show it as many times as we can. And there are some key revisions in this new edition of the book. Can you tell us a little bit about what those revisions are and what's been done over the past decade as it relates to research related to self-leadership?
Yeah, you know, this book came out originally in 2005, and we actually started the whole concept of self-leadership at the Ken Blanchard companies back in the early 90s, even though there wasn't a lot of research to support this idea of self-leadership. But the Ken Blanchard companies was really famous for a couple of things. One was the one-minute manager, and the other was a situational leadership model, SL2 it's called. And a cornerstone of the whole concept of SL2 is that leadership is not something you do to people, but it's something you do with people. And so it just made sense intuitively that if we're going to do something with people, wouldn't it be wonderful if both managers and their direct reports, if individual contributors spoke the same language and understood the same model around leadership. And SL2 is the most used leadership model in the world. So it just made sense that we would create a program around that. And so we had early adopters, and we actually had some of our own research. We had organizations like an appliance company, a major appliance company, who had a call center, and they trained all of their individuals in self-leadership, and as a result of that, they had a significantly higher customer service index satisfaction score. And we had a major retailer who merged, or they acquired another major retailer. It was one of the biggest mergers in retailing history. It's also gone down as one of the most successful mergers in history. Both companies now have become one and are very, very successful. And they accredited the fact that we trained their individuals in self-leadership at the same time as we were training their managers in SL2. And as a result, there was this common language. There was this capacity to partner. So I guess this is a really long answer to your question, I'm sorry, but what I really wanted to say was, in the early days, there wasn't a lot of research around self-leadership. But as you said, in the past decade, there has literally been an explosion of academic research around self-leadership, and the results are so compelling that we felt that we really needed to update the training program and also revise the book to take advantage of all this wonderful new insight around the power of self-leaders.
Wow, that's really helpful and exciting to hear. Would it be possible for you to share with us some of those learnings and findings?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know what the role is of the people that are listening to our session, but let me just say that, for example, if you're an HR manager, I think that the results that are happening in the world are really pertinent to you. But if you're an individual contributor, I'm hoping that you as well will be listening to these findings and find them compelling in terms of how you might literally change the way you go to work every day. So, for example, one finding was that the greatest key indicator or essential key to any initiative that an organization puts forth, like a change initiative, a new customer service program, let's say that you're implementing a new software platform, the key ingredient to the success of those initiatives is the proactive behavior of self-leaders. So that's huge. Like, it's not the leadership, it's not the change itself. It's whether or not people are proactively engaging in the change. Then the findings are that there are specific proactive behaviors that lead to that success. So we've actually been able to identify what are those proactive behaviors that self-leaders can do that means success for the organization. We also found, when I say we, because we've actually done some of our own primary research at the Ken Blanchard companies, but what I'm really speaking about is kind of building on what thousands of studies are now showing throughout the world, and that is that proactive self-leadership behaviors can be taught. And the fourth thing I want to say is that, and this is really for every individual listening, if you will just engage in a proactive behavior, let's say in the morning of your day, you will have less stress and have more energy at the end of the day. So there is a significant correlation to your being a self-leader and your actual well-being at work that then carries over to the way you actually handle your family crises at home or your personal life or whatever. So I think those are pretty exciting findings.
Oh, I think so too. And I know, Susan, you and I have talked about these proactive behaviors before, but I'm guessing some of the people on the call haven't heard about those specific proactive behaviors that we can each take if we want to have more energy at the end of the day and less stress throughout the day. So could you share those proactive behaviors with us?
Yeah. There's one that I'm just particularly kind of on a mission around. There's been some recent studies around feedback, and I've even created a feedback program for leaders, and it's a really good feedback program. But what the research showed is that after millions of dollars and thousands of hours of training leaders on how to give feedback, they still don't do it. They don't do it effectively. In fact, the research showed that 64% of the time, the feedback caused more harm than good. Yikes. And so, it's kind of scary. And so the conclusion of the research was we need to teach individuals how to ask for feedback. Well, that's something we've been doing since the early 90s. In fact, we've often talked about the most powerful phrase in the English language, and I've obviously worked all over the world, and our stuff's been translated into 20 or 30 different languages. And so some countries that don't really even have this phrase, they tell me that when they want to be assertive and they want to ask for feedback in a way that's not threatening, they actually go to English and use the I need phrase. So I need your input on how I conducted the meeting this morning. What did you think I did that really worked? And what advice do you have so I could do it better in the future? Or here's my report. I would really appreciate, or I need 2 or 3 ideas on how the next time I do this report, I might make it even better. So if we would just simply start asking for feedback, and what if we did that on a regular basis? What if every day we got to work and we thought, okay, what did I do yesterday? What have I been doing over the past week? Who could I go to get feedback on what I did right and what I did wrong so that I could continue to learn and grow every day? Which, by the way, would satisfy one of our psychological needs, which is for competence and learning and growing every day. So there's this wonderful kind of intersection, if you will, around proactive behaviors of being a self-leader and your optimal motivation, actually satisfying some of your psychological needs by being proactive. There's a lot of cool research, with the intersection of those two things. So that's just one idea. Ask for feedback.
Well, I'm wondering if people on the call have any response to that. I know that it's a scary thing, isn't it, Susan? But I think what I hear you saying is that when we ask in a way that invites feedback that can actually help us grow, then we can satisfy that important need that we have to be able to learn.
You know, it is, but I mean, yes, and I just heard Brene Brown speak last week, and I know there's so many people that are so just in love with Brene Brown's work on vulnerability and courage. And one of the things that she talked about was how we are never more vulnerable than when we ask for help. And what's interesting about that, and this is what we've been saying since the early 90s, is that when we ask for help, that we are actually coming from a position of strength. That when we ask for help and we're in a position of strength, that other people are compelled to help us. So it's ironic that asking for, I need something from you, or I need something for my own growth, may make us feel vulnerable. It actually is coming from a position of strength, and other people see us as being strong. So if you're looking for ways to be vulnerable, and yet through your vulnerability, because Brene says vulnerability is actually a strength, vulnerability is not a sign of weakness by any stretch of the imagination, then asking for feedback is kind of the, I guess, the easy avenue, not the easy, but it's the most obvious avenue to take.
Great. So Susan, did you want to talk about the other two proactive behaviors that you recommend that people begin their days with?
Yeah, the other one is what I call proactive problem solving. And so and one of the things, if you don't mind, I'm just going to show in the book, one of the things that I think is really important for people to understand is the Situational Leadership II model. And in this model, it talks about the fact that as self-leaders, or as individuals, trying to figure out how it goes, we actually go from D1 to D2 to D3 to D4 in terms of our development level. So what we do is if we get our needs met, we go from an enthusiastic beginner who has little competence to a lot of commitment to someone who has a lot of competence and a lot of commitment. And when we get to that point in our jobs, when we've got, like, let's say we're working on a particular goal or task, or we're in a situation where we are really at D3 or D4, we have competence. We are the best people to solve problems. And yet sometimes what we do is, and I don't think a lot of people would relate to this word, but in fact, we make ourselves victims. We become victims of hoping someone else is going to solve the problem, or that someone will notice that we're miserable. You know, we go to lunch and we talk, I'll say talk, but it's really another word. We talk about everything that's not happening in the organization that we wish were, or we talk about what our managers did or didn't do. And so if we would start to do proactive problem solving, and in the book we actually talk about what that looks like. What it means is that in 30 seconds or less, you say, here is the issue, here is the problem, here's why this problem is important, here's how this problem is impacting us. So you just very quickly, maybe even in 1 or 2 sentences, here's the problem and here's the impact it's having. But here's what's key to this proactive behavior. You present 3 solutions. You never come up with one solution. We've all done that, and we've all been rejected, and that's why we stop coming up with solutions. The fact is, human beings listen and learn in 3s, and if all you do is give someone one solution, they're going to say, oh, well, there's probably other solutions, so I'm going to reject yours. But if you come up with 3 solutions, even if 2 of them are crap and 1 of them is really good, the fact is it demonstrates that you've done your due diligence, you've thought about it, and if you're presenting it to me, you're giving me a choice. And I love choices, right? And so I'm going to then trust that you've actually thought about this because you're giving me the pros and cons of each of those solutions. And then you say to me, and Susan, of those 3 options, in looking at the pros and cons of each one, here's the one I recommend. This is actually called completed staff work. It was invented in the military so that rank and file could actually manage up more effectively and break the barrier between rank and file and officers. And what they found is something like 98% of the time, when you present proactively your solutions in the way I just described, 98% of the time you'll probably get buy-in. And the other 2% of the time, you're going to have what's called a learning moment. And in that learning moment, you learn something that you didn't know that actually affects the solution that you came up with, and usually you end up either coming back with a better solution or you're able to accept what is. So I think that's a really powerful technique that we advocate self-leaders do on a regular basis.
It seems like that one also underscores some of the psychological needs that you describe and why motivating people doesn't work and what does.
Oh, I love that, Becky. Thank you so much.
Well, I was thinking about when you give someone a choice, then you're speaking to their need for autonomy.
You've got it. You've got it. And you're giving them information that they don't have, which builds their competence. And because you're going to them and asking for their insight or their recommendation, you're actually building relatedness. So you take a technique like proactive problem solving, and you're actually stimulating between you and the other person that you're dealing with, your manager, let's say, the 3 psychological needs of ARC: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And you know what that does? It builds trust, because trust is a byproduct of our psychological needs being satisfied. So yeah, this book on self-leadership, the new training program that we've created at Blanchard around self-leadership, is really putting into action a lot of what the research says around motivation. So I think that's pretty exciting. Thank you for noticing.
I totally agree. Oh, of course. Well, so there's one more proactive behavior that you've talked about.
There is.
So the first one is, let's just make sure I'm remembering them because I want to walk away with these in my back pocket. The first one is to ask for feedback and to use a statement like "I need." And the second one
and Becky, do that every day. Just get used to it. It doesn't always have to be your manager, but it needs to be someone. Just get used to asking for feedback. Go ahead.
Okay, the second one is the proactive problem solving, and you suggest coming up with 3 solutions and the pros and cons and presenting all 3.
Right.
How about your recommendation? Yes.
The third one is to really start, and this is really what the book, one of the main focuses of the book, and that is to really understand your own development level. To understand that when you take on a new goal, that you're going to go through a learning, a pattern of learning that's been substantiated by hundreds of years of research about the way adults learn. And when I say hundreds, Le Corbusier started this with the team research over 100 years ago, and throughout the last century, we've really been looking at how do adults take in information, how do they access information, how do they process information, how do they actually integrate information so that they can use it. And so we go through this development continuum, or these phases of performance that are predictable. And because they're predictable, we can learn to identify where we are in that learning cycle. And at each of those learning moments, at each of those development levels or phases of performance, we have different needs. So when I'm just beginning a goal, I have very different needs than when I've mastered the goal and I'm trying to just maintain my enthusiasm or my commitment to it. And so leaders, what we teach leaders is that leaders should be able to diagnose our development level and then give us the leadership style that's most appropriate for what we need at the moment. Now that's wonderful, and I think we need to teach leaders how to do that. But what if you have a leader that has more than one direct report? What if your leader is managing you? Not only do they have other direct reports, they have their own work, and you have more than one goal. So this is really asking a lot of a manager. And so what we assume is that our manager always knows what we need. This kind of cracks me up, Becky, because you know how, and you and I have had these conversations about in our personal lives, we really need to tell our best friends and our spouses, our significant others, you know, the people that are important in our lives, we need to tell them what we need because they can't read our minds, right? And yet, at work, we expect our managers to know what we need and give it to us. They don't even love us, and we're expecting, well, maybe they do, but that's another story. I won't go there. But the fact is that that's a different kind of relationship. And so managers are not mind readers. I believe that managers, most of them, wake up with really good intentions. I don't think they wake up in the morning thinking, how can I go in there today and mess up someone's day? How can I go in there and make you miserable? I think they wake up with good intentions, but they don't know what we need. And so it really is the responsibility of a self-leader. And let me just define for you what we mean by self-leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Self-leadership means having the mindset and the skill set to accept responsibility and take initiative for proactively getting what we need to succeed. So if we understand our own development level, and if I'm at D1, then I can go and I can ask my manager for high direction. Show me how to do what I need to do. Help me put an action plan for learning together. Clarify my role. Help me understand the priorities. So we actually teach self-leaders in this book what to ask for. What if I'm at D2 and now I not only don't have competence, but my commitment's gone down because of reality shock. I don't know what I'm doing, and now I don't even want to do it. Now what do I ask for? I need someone to give me a rationale. Why is this important again? Give me feedback. What have I done right? What have I done wrong? And so we really, as self-leaders, need to take accept responsibility and take initiative for asking for what we need. And one final thing on this, Becky. Well, probably not final, but here's another thought. A leader is anyone who can give us the direction and the support that we need. So rather than playing the role of victim and saying, oh, my manager doesn't understand me, my manager doesn't know what I need, my manager can't even do what I'm doing, let alone tell me how to do it, then we have got to reach out. We have got an extraordinary, especially with the internet and with all of our resources today, there's no reason we can't get the direction and support we need from somewhere. That's our responsibility.
So that's what being a self-leader is.
Yeah, or guess who suffers?
Yes. Well, so in the book you describe 3 tricks of a self-leader. Now, are those the same as the proactive behaviors, or are those 3 different things? So will you tell us about the tricks?
You really actually read the book. I'm really impressed. The thing is that the 3 proactive behaviors that I've just described to you, they do take courage. They do require vulnerability on your part. They do take proactive behavior. So what we have to do as self-leaders is we have to have a mindset that enables us to apply the skill set. And we say there's 3 aspects of the mindset. And the first one is to challenge assumed constraints. So that whole idea that our leaders know what we need is an assumed constraint. The whole idea that, well, I brought up an idea in the past and they rejected it, so they're never going to listen to anything I say anyway. That's an assumed constraint. The idea that nothing ever changes around here. That's an assumed constraint. The idea that, well, I don't have a college education, so there's no way that I can get ahead. Now, that may be true, if they have like criteria that say you have to have a college education. But you know what? I still know people that somehow have broken through the rules, the criteria, and gone on to do amazing things. So we all have stories, and one of the reasons, this is coming out of left field, I've never shared this before, but
You never know what's going to happen when you get on one of my webinars, Susan.
Okay, it's because this is TMI, I'm sure. No, it's not that big a deal, but I used to be in the advertising business and owned my own advertising agency for years. But I remember buying advertising in the very first People magazine that came out back in the early 70s, late 70s, early 80s. And Mia Farrow, I still remember, Mia Farrow was on the cover. And we bought advertising in that magazine, and it was such a revolutionary magazine. I have read every People magazine, which comes out weekly, since it came out. And the reason I read People magazine is because there's always articles in there. I mean, there's a lot of, celebrity stuff, but there's also always articles in there about people who are challenging assumed constraints, who are doing things that the rest of us think are impossible and that we become victimized by. And so every day we can see and tell if there's people who challenge assumed constraints. So I would just ask anyone who's on this GoToMeeting today to really ask themselves, what are my limited beliefs? What do I believe that's actually keeping me from being excellent? What do I believe that's keeping me where I am? You know, if you keep on doing what you've always done, you'll keep on getting what you've always gotten. And a lot of that is because we have a belief system that's limiting us, and we need to break through that.
Mm.
So that's really the first, you know, challenge assumes constraints is the first mindset. And the second one is to activate your points of power. There's some real issues with power. If a leader is using power to get things done, then our research shows, and when I say our, it's actually our research. My husband, who's the head of research for the Ken Blanchard companies, Dr. Drea Zagarmi, actually won the most prestigious award in the industry for cutting-edge research, for research he did on employee engagement and a leader's use of power. We have just submitted 2 academic journal articles where I'm one of the co-authors around the leader's use of power and the effect it has on people's motivation. And so we've got to help leaders understand that even obviously coercive power is negative and it's not going to work, but even forms of power like referent power, where you use your relationship with someone to get something done, can put people into an imposed motivational outlook. Or reward power, where you can dangle the carrot in front of someone as a way to motivate them, will put them into a suboptimal motivational outlook. So almost every form of power that a leader has that they're able to use, their position power or their legitimate power, usually puts people into a suboptimal motivational outlook. And that is why we need to teach individuals how to activate their own power instead of giving their power away and depending on a leader's power to get things done. And so what we encourage people to do is to look at other forms of power, expand what they think of as powerful. And so if you're doing a particular task, let's say you're a secretary, and you have gatekeeping responsibilities to the, you know, who gets to see the CEO, I can tell you that every salesperson will tell you the most powerful person they have to deal with is the secretary, administrative assistant, the gatekeeper who has the capacity to say yes or no, you have access or you don't. I can also tell you that most secretaries, administrative assistants don't consider themselves powerful. So what we really want to do is to help people understand the nature of their own power, their own personal power. Yeah, and then the third mindset is to be proactive, to be vulnerable, to embrace the idea that when you are proactive, you're actually doing yourself a real favor. So those are the 3 mindsets that will help you to apply the skill set of a self-leader.
Wow, this half hour has just flown by, Susan. I have so enjoyed digging into the learning of self-leadership and the 1-minute manager with you. As we wrap up the hour, I want to just find out if there's any kind of one bit of parting advice you might have for the people on the call who would want to increase their skill in leading themselves.
You know what? Yes, Becky, and you know, Ken Blanchard and Lori Hawkins, who are the the co-authors on this book, I think all 3 of us have this deeply rooted, all I can say is this mission that what we want to do is empower people in the workplace, and the only way that people can be empowered is to take that power within empowerment and realize that empowerment is a concept, but self-leadership is what you do to become empowered, to make it work. And so there's just this notion that in a world crying out for effective leadership, the best place to start is with ourselves.
Wow, thank you so much, Susan. I would invite all of you, we will be sending some follow-up, and if you have any additional questions for Susan, I'm sure she would welcome that communication, and we will also have a recording if there are those that you would want to share this with in the future. So Susan, thank you again for investing this time with us.
Thank you, Becky. I really enjoyed it.